two, one.
Hello and welcome. We have made it to the final week of previews. We still have some more preseason info to chat about next week. And then games for the regular season will pick up in 2 weeks. But today, final division preview is the AFC East. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And as always, going to go with the first place finisher from last year all the way down to the last place finisher from last year. And last year's first place finisher was the New England Patriots. They certainly got in that groove of worst to first that happens every year, seemingly in the NFL. They had been worst in the AFC East in 2024. In fact, one of the worst teams in the NFL, and they managed to drag themselves all the way to first in the East, winning 13 games, going 13-4. They actually ended up winning the AFC, went all the way to the Super Bowl, where they came up just short. Among their losses, Stephon Diggs, a wide receiver who led them, is no longer there. Austin Hooper at tight end moved on. Josh Dobbs, their backup quarterback, and Clavon Chason on the defensive line. They brought in A.J. Brown at wide receiver. They traded for him from the Eagles, and they signed Romeo Doubs from the Green Bay Packers. They brought in guard Elijah Vera Tucker and edge Draymond Jones. And recently, they just traded last year's number 2 wide receiver, Kayshon Boutte, to the Houston Texans. So kind of remaking that wide receiver group. Drake May was quarterback 2 last year, also the runner-up for NFL MVP. Travion Henderson as a rookie and Ramondre Stevenson split the backfield, both of them in RB2 range. RB21 for Henderson, RB25 for Stevenson, while Hunter Henry was tight end 9. Look, the Patriots still have a very good team. I would not be surprised if Drake May's offensive stats and passing numbers actually look better now that he has Doubs and A.J. Brown. They've given him some improved weapons. I still like Hunter Henry in there. I think he has some low-end tight end 1 upside, although I like him a little bit better as my tight end 2. I think A.J. Brown will finish in the top 12, be a wide receiver 1. And I like Doubs to be kind of a wide receiver 3 in that nice range there as a good possession guy. I think the backfield will shake out roughly the same. Henderson probably more explosive, but Ramondre Stevenson maybe more reliable and definitely a better blocker. It wouldn't be a shock to see them win the East again. I think either way they will probably be in the playoff picture and make the playoffs. But I think it's, again, going to come down to them and this next team who finished second, which was the Buffalo Bills. Bills went 12-5, but ended up coming just short in the East. They lost out in the divisional round to Denver, and after years of coming up just short in the playoffs, they decided to move on from head coach Sean McDermott, who was let go. A longtime edge, A.J. Epinesa, moved on. Longtime backup quarterback Mitch Trubisky also went to the Tennessee Titans. Joe Brady, now the head coach there. They brought in DJ Moore at wide receiver from the Chicago Bears via trade. They drafted Skylar Bell to improve their wide receiver group. They signed center Wood Cushenberry and brought in Bradley Chubb at the edge. Josh Allen was QB1 for fantasy last year and QB1 in all our hearts. James Cook, running back 6. Khalil Shakir, wide receiver 36, was their top receiver. At tight end, Dalton Kincaid, tight end 20. Dawson Knox, tight end 28. And I don't think a lot changes for the Bills. I think they still have a solid defense. But now Josh Allen has a true number 1 receiver in DJ Moore. I think he will do well in this first year. I think that was a good pickup for them. I like him as a solid wide receiver too. Josh Allen was quarterback 1 last year. I think it's pretty easy to have him at least going into the season as the best bet to finish as QB1. Again, he gives you those rushing upside numbers and is a very good passer. Barring some kind of injury, I think he is the quarterback you want in Dynasty, Superflex, Redraft, whatever you are doing. James Cook got a big contract last year, went out and proved that the year before wasn't a fluke, was still a top 12 running back. Running is what they want to do. I think those two guys are still their best offensive assets. Other than that, Khalil Shakir has been kind of in that wide receiver 3-4 range for a while. I don't think a lot about that will change. And tight end, Dalton Kincaid has upside, maybe has a higher ceiling, but they still use Knox. Kincaid has struggled to stay healthy. I think Kincaid's probably still a tight end too, and Dawson Knox kind of a guy that floats around there, maybe a good spot start in a weak week. The Bills, They were second in the division last year. Would not surprise me if they go back to being first in the division. I think the Patriots and the Bills are both playoff teams. It just depends on who wins the division and who ends up being a wild card. The third place team last year was the Miami Dolphins. They finished 7-10. They started dreadful. They got hot a little bit in the middle, and then they faded down the stretch. Mike McDaniel gone as head coach. They also cleaned house, particularly on offense, gone. Starting quarterback from last year, Tua Tagovailoa. Starting receivers, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are both gone. Their edge, Bradley Chubb, gone, actually moved in division. And tight end Darren Waller also off the roster. Jeff Hafley comes in, takes over as head coach. He installed Malik Willis, pictured here, as their new quarterback. I was excited for Willis to get a chance to prove himself, but this is not a great infrastructure and supporting cast surrounding him. They did bring in a bunch of receivers. They signed Jalen Tolbert and Tua Atwell, although they just traded Atwell back to the Rams. They drafted Caleb Douglas and Chris Bell. Will any of it make a big difference? It's really hard for me to feel that it will. Malik Washington, the holdover, is still in that group. There are a few other options and pieces there as well. The one great piece of their offense is the backfield, Devon Achane, who finished as running back 5 last year. He's probably the only good, solid bet for fantasy. I know some people are saying Willis, with his running ability, is going to have upside and could finish as a top 12 quarterback. That feels like a stretch given all that the Dolphins have going on. I think they are going to be probably one of the worst teams in the NFL record-wise, and moving toward a top draft pick next year, which would lend itself to, normally when you get a top draft pick, taking a quarterback. So does that mean Willis kind of gets 1 year with a subpar starting cast and supporting cast and then gets pushed aside? It very well could be. That kind of bums me out. Maybe we'll see some sparks from him. I still think he could end up in the QB2 range. I feel like QB1 is too rich unless he's out there running for 2,000 yards. The fourth place team last year was the Jets. They were kind of an unmitigated disaster, only 3-14. They had brought in Justin Fields. That experiment did not work. Aaron Glenn remains as the head coach, but he cleared out both coordinators, basically starting over. Justin Fields is also gone, traded to the Chiefs, where he will be a backup for Patrick Mahomes. They also lost John Mechie III, a receiver. Their backup quarterback, Tyrod Taylor, who went to Green Bay, and guard Elijah Vera Tucker, who also moved in division to the Patriots. They brought back Geno Smith, a player that they originally drafted, who then had some good stints with Seattle and a rough 2025 in Las Vegas. He is now the franchise quarterback and really the only reliable and proven quarterback on the roster. Behind him, it's looking like rookie Cade Klubnik, who was a late round draft pick, is going to be the number 2 unless they scoop up a veteran after cut day. They also drafted wide receiver Omar Cooper Jr., who was a star at Indiana, and Kenyon Sadiq at tight end. Breece Hall is back, signed a long-term deal after getting the franchise tag. It was running back 19 last year. Garrett Wilson, tons of upside, had some injuries last year, was wide receiver 62. Adonai Mitchell, they added in trade mid-season, was wide receiver 73, and Mason Taylor was tight end 32. So kind of an embarrassment of riches in the skill positions if it all pans out. Kenyon Sadiq has been banged up a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see whether it's him or Mason Taylor that makes a bigger impact. I don't know that I would want to trust either of them as my lone starting option for fantasy this year. I still like Garrett Wilson. I think he has wide receiver 2 upside, Breece Hall running back 2 upside. The big wild card is Geno. What kind of Geno are we getting? Are we getting the Geno that we saw in Seattle that was pretty solid and actually took them to the playoffs? Or are we getting the Geno we saw last year in Las Vegas? And there are a lot of range of outcomes. That's going to be on Frank Reich, the new offensive coordinator, to kind of put that together. But a better supporting cast and an opportunity. And I think that's the difference between whether the Jets are kind of fun and friskier, maybe a 7-9 win team that surprises at times, that challenges at times, or whether they are kind of an unmitigated disaster again, more like a 3-5 win team, in which case, it wouldn't be a shock if Glenn ends up being gone mid-season. So a wide range of outcomes there, but that is a look at the AFC East. I will be back next week with my playoff predictions and maybe some of my feelings about fantasy going into redraft season. Then the following week, it'll be time for week 1 and the full week 1 preview.